microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is just past 11 here in Leiden, the Netherlands. Welcome to this, I think it's the second, what we now call in modern parlance, webinar. It's an online lecture by one of our fellows. My name is Willem Vogelsang. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Institute for Asian Studies, your host right now. And I'm going to introduce the lecturer for today. But first of all, let me tell you that here in Leiden, at least, it's beautiful weather. And all I can say to you, wherever you are, I wish you were here. It's absolutely beautiful. Right, the speaker for today is Preeti Chopra. And she's normally working from Wisconsin, Madison. She's professor in architecture, urban history, and visual studies. And she's going to give a lecture on an institute in Bombay, the Bombay's Royal Alfred Sailors Home, Colonial Institute, and she's going to tell about it. And let me give you just details. The lecture will be for half an hour. And the lecture will also be recorded. So for other people, they can also watch it at another time. Mind that the lecture and the PowerPoint, that will be recorded. So in the meantime, during the lecture, you can also ask questions and use the chat modem. Those will not be shown to others. So you're quite free to ask whatever question you want to ask. Also, bear in mind that after the lecture, half an hour, there will be a half hour that the questions, or at least some of the questions, will be answered by the speaker. For that, it will really help if when you use the chat modem and ask a question, next half hour, not only your name, but also give your background, so where you come from. And that will help the speaker also and to address you more personally. After the lecture and after answering these questions, we will formally close the meeting, but perhaps for about half an hour or so, you can contact the speaker also directly or indirectly if you have any further questions. So I hope you're going to enjoy it, and I would like, well, not to pass the floor, but pass the screen to Preeti Chopra. Preeti, you can see, you can hear?
Yes.
Okay, I'll turn myself off now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Willem, for that introduction, and thank you to EAS and all the staff. And thank you all for attending this talk. So this is anyway my first try on this new kind of media. Between 1872 to 76, a palatial Gothic Revival building known as Royal Alfred Sailors Home was constructed in Bombay, now known as Mumbai. Designed by Frederick Williams Stevens, this was an institution for European and Christian sailors. A native Hindu prince and the colonial government together contributed towards this building. Why was such an institution founded in Bombay, and how did this charitable building fit into the emerging joint public realm of Bombay? So this presentation looks back across the distance of time to key moments in the history of the Sailors' Home in colonial Bombay, and also to its surrounding context. It grapples with the complex meanings of the Bombay Sailors' Home with reference to its foundation, architectural style, location, users, and neighbors. The Sailors' Home came to house different occupants over time and acquired new neighbors in its vicinity. Now, the building houses the state police headquarters in Mumbai. Thus, its meaning has not been static. My presentation pays attention to the physical distance between buildings in the vicinity, serving Europeans and natives, and the social distance between various groups. How did the Sailors' Home relate to elite and charitable institutions for Europeans in its vicinity? Did the proximity between Europeans in this area help to bridge the distance between various European classes? Did the physical closeness between these European institutions and the joint public realm reduced the social distance between Europeans and native populations. Part 1. The Royal Alfred Sailors Home and the Joint Public Realm. The Royal Alfred Sailors Home was located in an arena in Bombay that emerged in the second half of the 19th century, and which I have referred to as the joint public realm. Distinct from ethnic, religious, racial, and class territories, this joint public realm was a spatial arena that was, in theory, owned by and open to all of Bombay's populations. In the 1860s, under the leadership of Governor Sir Bartle Frere, the colonial government saw an opportunity to initiate the long-intended project of throwing down the fort walls. The fall of the fort walls opened up the plain, creating a new public arena for government offices and public institutions. So work on Frere's scheme for this new arena began while he was in Bombay and was continued by his successors. Facing the sea in one grand sweep were a number of public buildings based on variations of the Gothic Revival style. And in this image, you see some of these buildings. And this is the government secretariat over here. This is the convocation hall. And here is the library and Rajabai Clock Tower, the university library and the Rajabai Clock Tower. And then far in the distance over here, you see the High Court. The oval Maidan with a riding track on the outside edge foregrounds this ensemble of buildings. And just to give you a sense of where it's located, this is the fort area and this is the esplanade. And these buildings are over here and they're facing the back bay, which then actually connects up. It's a water body which connects up to the Arabian Sea. So they are located right here. 19th century Bombay was a pluralistic city with a wide variety of groups. With their distinct clothing, the modes of each group distinguished them from other groups. Each community dressed in a different way that signaled their affiliation, while at the same time they constructed their own religious and social institutions, forming distinct community landscapes. Before Frere's transformation of the city, the classical architectural style of the British was the mode that distinguished their community landscape from that of other groups. Apart from the limited public use of the town hall, there was no genuine public arena. So the significance of Frere's transformation of Bombay was not simply stylistic, but lay in the creation of a common public landscape. So this then made Bombay's Gothic Revival style used for public buildings and in public buildings constructed in partnership with Bombay's native elite significant as representing the consensus. They were the common ground for Bombay's populations and formed the backdrop to Bombay's multiple modes of life and architectural styles. In the second half of the 19th century, Bombay's native public would have read Gothic Revival buildings as public buildings to which they had access. Many of these buildings were the product of a joint enterprise. The Royal Alfred Sailors Home, partially paid for by an Indian prince, interrupted the emerging common understanding of public buildings in Gothic Revival styles. It did so by serving a specific group, Christian European sailors, and thus restricted public access. Part 2. Exemplar of the joint enterprise of charity. In the second half of the 19th century, at ports of call, European sailors could avail of a global network of charitable welfare institutions, commonly of British origin and Protestant. The Sailors' Home in Bombay, that you see to your left, was one such establishment. It was constructed at Apollo Bandar, just south of the fort, the nucleus of colonial settlement. The home commemorated the visit of the Duke of Edinburgh in 1870, and it stood opposite the Wellington Fountain that you see to your right. That's right here. and that was raised in 1863 to commemorate the Duke of Wellington's visits to Bombay. The Apollo Bandar Road took a southeast route from the fountain to the Apollo Bandar Pier, where passengers and sailors embarked and disembarked. Even in the context of port architecture, Bombay Sailors Home looked as, quote, a rather luxurious hostel, end quote, with large airy rooms and bathrooms. The Sailors' Home used both European and native expertise and Indian labor in its construction. In 1867, Stevens was an assistant engineer in the Public Works Department, or the PWD, under Colonel J.A. Fuller. The ironwork was by Macfarlane, while Lockwood Kipling, and most likely the native students of the J.J. School of Art, designed the capitals and cornices. The overseer for the building was a native by the name of Sitaram Khande Rao. The joint enterprise that forged British Bombay was an intentional cooperation between the colonial government, Indian and European elites, financial, technical, and artistic, and Indian labor. Public institutions that served all communities belonged to the joint enterprise of collaboration between government and native philanthropists, experts, and labor. Philanthropy was broadly secular and inclusive, open to all communities. And this is kind of important. I distinguish philanthropy from charity. Charitable projects, in contrast to philanthropy, served a specific community. In colonial India, charity often retained its religious bias, served specific communities, and excluded others. The Sailors' Home is a product of what I call the joint enterprise of charity. It replicates many of the processes of a joint enterprise, which created institutions and spaces in Bombay for the public at large. However, here, a wealthy native, Khande Rao Gaikwad, the native prince who ruled over Baroda, collaborated with the government by giving a financial gift of rupees 200,000 for an institution meant for a specific community, that of European sailors. Their contributions went towards supporting a charitable society, the Bombay Sailors Home Society, and this resulted in the creation of an exclusive subsidized European charitable enclave. The government gave the site in leasehold to the charity at a nominal rent, and according to government records, gave about 140,000 towards the construction of the home. And this money would have come from Indian populations, either by ratepayers or through some other means. Historian Douglas Haynes has drawn attention to gift-giving practices in Western India. In order to gain political influence, merchants in Western India also gave gifts to rulers in accordance with the latter's cultural norms and expectations, which were often distinct from their own. In the 19th century, under British rule, the form of gift given by merchants shifted from tribute to philanthropy. My work shows that the gifts of native elites considered worthy under British rule were not just philanthropic, but also charitable, financing projects for Europeans in this instance. Identifying the Bombay Sailors' Home as a preeminent example of the joint enterprise of charity allows us to revisit institutions founded for the public at large. For example, a Parsi ward was established for Parsis in the Jamshedji Jijibai Hospital, which was opened in 1845, and this still exists, even though by 1881, Hindu and Muslim patients began to share the same. So this hospital was an early example of the joint enterprise between native Parsi philanthropist Sir Jamshedji Jijibai and the Bombay government. Enveloped in a large institution, charitable ward such as this was scarcely visible nor controversial. In contrast, the Royal Alfred Sailors Home was a hyper-visible example of the joint enterprise of charity. Unlike the Parsi ward, it was not part of a government institution owned and managed by the state for the larger public. The Sailors' Home was meant for Christian European sailors, not the community of the Hindu prince who donated generously towards the construction of the building. Native papers, like the Arunodaya, were quick to criticize, and I quote from it. The new Sailors' Home, bitterly observes the writer, will perpetuate the memory among the people, not only of the Duke's arrival, but of the unworthy selfishness of the English government and of its censurable partiality to its own race. Part 3. European institutions in the vicinity of the Royal Alfred Sailors Home. In the urban context, the Sailors' Home was the first of a set of buildings that formed an emerging edge or border south of, and in some cases, facing off the arena of the joint public realm. Opposite and north of the Sailors' Home, overlooking the Wellington Fountain, this south edge of the joint public realm would come to include George Whittett's Prince of Wales Museum. This was constructed between 1905 and 1937 in the Indo-Saracenic style that you see to the top right, and that's this building over here, and it's over here at this sort of crescent site. Northwest of the Sailors' Home and looking across it over the Wellington Fountain was the Kawasji Jahangir Hall and Institute of Science, also designed by George Whitted and constructed between 1911 and 1920. And this was designed in the Renaissance Revival style. And you see an image of it to the right, and that's just over here. From its opening in 1819 until October 1895, passengers to Bombay usually disembarked at Apollo Bandar. Later, Ballad Pier, which was further north, became the main arrival point. Up to 1906, many additions were made to it, which made, quote, the broad pier head the favorite place of resort for Bombay society in the evening when there is no band playing at the bandstand, end quote. Bombay's society referred to the city's European elite. There was sufficient room for, quote, several score of carriages. There were refreshment rooms, a custom house, a post office, and a police chowkey or station house, end quote. Designed by architect George Ormiston, a 100-feet long Burmese-style pavilion that you see to your left sheltered passengers. In 1911, King George V and Queen Mary were welcomed here, and a temporary pavilion and hall in white plaster for the reception was raised for this purpose. So you can see that pier, this is the location right here. So this is the fort, and this is south of the fort. Subsequently to the designs of George Whitted, the Gateway of India that you see, quote, to form a sea gateway to India and to provide a reception hall for all important occasions, end quote. The major guidebook I referred to for examining the neighbourhood of the Sailors' Home is commonly referred to as Maclean's Guide to Bombay. It was written by James Mackenzie Maclean, and he was a journalist as well as owner and editor of the Bombay Gazette, and that was for a number of years in the second half of the 19th century. And he was also elected as Fellow of the Bombay University. At some point, he was also the chairman of the Bombay Town Council. So basically, his guide provides us with a European perspective, of course, but also a somewhat local perspective as well. So Maclean's Guide of 1906 leads the visitor from the Apollo Bandar to the city's public buildings, and they commence with buildings for the use of Europeans. They are in turn the Bombay Yacht Club House to the east of the Apollo Bandar, and that you see to your right. So this is the Yacht Club House over here, and it's really just to the right of, if your back is towards the pier, it's really just adjacent to that, to the right. And then the next building he refers to is the Royal Bombay Yacht Club Chambers on the south side of Apollo Bandar Road that you see to your left. Further on is the Sailors Home, which faced the Wellington Fountain itself at the intersection of a number of important roads. Leading away from it towards the south was Woodhouse Road. And the Young Men's Christian Association rooms were opened here in 1906. And that was the next building in Maclean's the Maclean Guides itinerary, and it was located on the Woodhouse Road. According to Maclean's guide, the site was given by the government free of cost. But according to another source, the land was leased in 1904 for 99 years. Native Christians were to avail of YMCA's facility, the Baikala branch, and so that's really much further out in the suburbs. And it's plausible to assume that the Christian Young Women's Home, the next building in the tourist itinerary, was also meant exclusively for Europeans. The Christian Young Women's Home was also located near this junction on a road leading west from the Wellington Fountain to the bandstand, and it fronted the cooperage. It was to the north of the cooperage, and the bandstand basically faced the back bay, this water body that I referred to over here, which then later on joins with the Arabian Sea. And just like the pier, the bandstand was a really popular place to resort for Bombay's elite European populations. So let me just sort of point out some of the sites again. So this is the pier over here. This is the Sailors' Home. This is at junction with the Wellington Fountain. This is Woodhouse Road, and the YMCA is, which is this building here, is located on this road. This other road then leads from the Wellington Fountain towards the bandstand. The bandstand is over here, and this wonderful site basically overlooking the back bay. And the Oval is to the north, and Esplanade is to the north, and here you see the fort. I should also point out that the South Fort was considered to be a more European area. And this is sort of this area at a sort of a more expanded scale. And so now we go slightly north of this area. This road north from basically the Wellington Fountain and up to Connaught Road to its north was where one found the most concentrated arena of the joint public realm, occupying most of the Esplanade section. And you see a plan of this section to your left. So after the Christian Young Women's Home, Maclean's guide of 1906 takes us to Elphinstone College. And here, this is a view of Elphinstone College. This was an institution for native students constructed on Hornby Road, which basically went from Wellington Fountain, north from Wellington Fountain, and it led to this building and then to other institutions on the Esplanade that were very much part of the joint public realm. So basically, in terms of the urban context, one might see the charitable institutions for Europeans, the Sailors' Home, the YMCA, the YWCA, as helping to set a southern limit to the expanding joint public realm. So these buildings and populations acted as intermediaries or a buffer, helping elite Europeans in their attempts to claim sections of the Apollo and the bandstand as exclusive European preserves, and to maintain a distance from the Indians they ruled over. So by the end of the rather than the ruling race, seemed to control the economy and space on the island of Bombay. When James Maclean, author of A Guide to 1999, after an absence of almost 20 years, he found the city much changed. Maclean had lived in Bombay between 1859 to 1880, and at that time, natives, according to him, occupied, quote, occupied a distinctly inferior position and did not see. Now the wealthy natives lived in the best houses. And another quote from Maclean: the Europeans in Bombay had taken a backseat. Nothing very good sites, but it seems to be that they were kind of cornered into the yacht club and the yacht club chambers. Part 4. Architecture as colonial sign. It is striking that buildings that were exclusively for Europeans were in Maclean's guide referred to as public buildings. Perhaps it was because these were designed and constructed with the help of government architects and engineers. This government involvement helped stage an entry into the city that was flanked by major institutions for Europeans, usually in some version of the Gothic. Adams, as acting architectural engineer, designed the Bombay Yacht Club house, which is here, in the domestic Gothic style, or according to Gillian Tyndall, in a mixture of Swiss and Hindu styles. Sometimes you can never tell with style. Because Adams had designed this building, the government gave him special permission to design the Royal Bombay Yacht Club chambers, to your left, when he was architectural executive engineer. This latter structure, which is the yacht club chambers, combined English neo-Gothic with Tudor, sort of half idiom on top there. The Association of the YMCA collected money for its construction. The YMCA is here, and stylistically, it's considered to be the yacht club chambers. Admitted to Adams, and benefactors from England donated funds for the Christian Young Women's Home. The YMCA and possibly the Christian Young Women's Home are also instances of a version of the joint enterprise of charity. In these instances, native gift giving apparently plays no role. In 1905, the Bombay government found that the only recipients of Bombay government's charitable donations were those institutions to whom, on considerations, it may be desirable to give assistance. End quote. This was not entirely accurate. Muslims also received government support. However, the yacht club house and chambers were for the European elite and were also designed by a government architect. Thus, the entanglements of the government with their community, Europeans, was often ambiguous. Part 5. The 1906 edition of Maclean's Guide calls the traveler's attention to, quote, magnificent pile of buildings for the sailors of Bombay architectural efforts, and it has the advantage of occupying one of the finest sites on the esplanade where four principal roads converge, end quote. The building actually had been planned for a less conspicuous site on the lower end of Hornby Row, and the Duke of Edinburgh had laid the foundation stone there. Maclean's Guide of 1906 alerts us that its prominent location likely led to the unhappiness of some, quote, agitators, who from time to time tried to impress the authorities with the fact of the unsuitability of its present position as accommodation for seamen, end quote. It was recommended that the sailors be moved, quote, to some temporary or permanent building near the Prince's Dock, end quote. No reason is mentioned for this. However, is no longer disembarked at the Polo Bandar Pier. And so the Prince's Dock would likely have been more or reasonably convenient to the sailors. But the authorities at that time took no notice of the objections raised, and we are assured that the Home's annual report, quote, shows that the frequenters of the establishment are as numerous as could be desired, end quote. So what might have been the objection to housing European sailors at a prominent site? European sailors were one of three groups of the European poor as categorized by David Arndt. At the end of the 19th century, out of a population of about 150,000 or so qualified as poor whites. And overall, and except when expedient, quote, Europeans of wealth and power despised and generally spurned poor of their own community, end quote. Colonial rulers feared that the European poor would lower the status of the white communities in the eyes of the natives. And native newspapers from the 1860s revealed that natives certainly despised Europeans for their riotous behavior in the city. So the Sailors' Home was one way of. However, it is likely that the prominent building on the site only made them more visible. Furthermore, it's likely that Europeans of wealth did not think that they were deserving of such a fine building at this site, and so the site is also getting better over time, right? And so it seems to be like, why are these people over here when this is actually becoming a really prominent location? With the construction of and later the chambers for elite Europeans at the 19th century, the presence of European sailors in their vicinity must have seemed odious. In contrast to coffee houses, Richard Sennett characterized clubs in the 18th century as private, as, quote, privacy meant speech was agreeable only when one controlled whom one was speaking to, end quote. Rather than the content of what was being said, it was of primary importance, exclusive in every way. The physical proximity between different European classes did not annihilate the social distance. To the conclusion that the Home's remoteness from the docks rendered it unsuitable, the government of Bombay took over the building. A council chamber serving the Bombay legislature was constructed at the rear of the building. In 1919, the monumental reforms were endorsed, which was an initial step towards self-government. The activities of the government were divided into two by a constitutional innovation of diarchy. The British controlled the central government. In the provinces, some subjects such as agriculture and education were relocated to Indian ministers. Vital areas such as law and order remained under the purview of the British governor. So during a period of increased opposition to British rule, the Sailors' Home became part of the joint public realm. Here, Indians would take steps towards self-government. The Sailors' Home, rather now the council chamber, serving the Bombay legislature, helped to reduce the distance between the ruling British and the ruling Indian classes. In 1936 to 37, the council hall building was enlarged to provide room for the recently created upper chamber. As the legislature of the Bombay Presidency under colonial rule, after independence in 1947, it served as the legislature of Bombay State and the state of Maharashtra until it shifted to a new building, the Vidhan Sabha, in front of the Mantralaya. Looking back through the distance of time has allowed us to see how this building changed from a charitable institution serving European site where Indians took early steps towards self-government. Thank you, and thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions. I've also put my email address in case you want to write to me with questions, comments, or suggestions.
Preeti, thank you so very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. Perhaps I'm a bit partial. I love 19th century photographs and look at them and confronted with a past that is not that very long ago. Not for me, at least.
No.
And photographs are such a direct contact with the past. I mean, I love it. And there are various points I would love to talk with you about. Not now, but perhaps next few weeks here in the garden, because there are various points I would like to exchange some ideas. Preeti, there have been various questions, and let me